Good morning again, everybody. Thanks for joining us here at WCIRB Mod Talk. I'm Dave Bellusci. With me this morning is Libbe, our Quality Assurance Director, and really one of our foremost experts on experience rating in California. So Rod and I are going to talk this morning about the effects of the 2019 X-Mod formula. You know, we're well into 2019 in terms of mods. We've issued about 90,000 of them. So how's it looking? As you know, we changed the formula, so we're going to kind of touch on that this morning. So just a reminder, our mod talks typically take about 30-40 minutes around experience rating. We have others this year that we'll talk about a little bit later. This session is summarizing the 2019 changes to the formula in California and what are some of the results under the new formula. So as we usually do, we're going to take a little bit of a primer on what experience rating is in California, remind everybody what the 2019 changes were, give some examples. Rod's going to go through some of the tools around the rate sheet and the estimator. And as always, we'll have some time for questions and answers. So before we turn in, just a couple things of logistics. Type in your questions and the questions panel. We'll try to get to them either contemporaneously or at the end of the session. If for some reason we don't get to it or don't answer it adequately or think of something later, feel free to email your questions to communications@wcirb.com. We'll also have a copy of this presentation is in your handout panel of the webinar material. And lastly, by the end of the day, we'll hope, or early tomorrow, we'll have a recording of this webinar online. If you enjoyed it so much and want to listen to it again, you'll have that opportunity. So with that, let's get rolling. So we usually start in this slide talking a little bit about what experience rating is in California. And this is an excerpt of what the statute says, section 11.730 of the insurance code. And I won't read every word, but just highlight kind of the key concepts. It utilizes past experience to forecast future losses. So it's not a recoupment. It's using the past only to the extent it's predictive or a good forecaster of an employer's future losses. And the other important thing, it really measures that in policyholders' experience against policyholders in the same industry or same classification. It doesn't compare the mod doesn't compare hospitals to restaurants. It really only compares trucking firms to trucking firms and, manufacturers to manufacturers and so forth. It's really industry specific. So again, it's a forecast of future loss. It's not a recoupment. The past experience used only to the extent it's predictive of future experience. While it is important, safety as an incentive to safety, it's not a proxy. Safety is one of the factors that goes into the X-bond, but there are many others. The type of operations that the employer does, where they're located, the wage levels they pay, many other factors that go into determining the mod. Only one of which is safety practices. That said, we think it is a very important incentive for employers to encourage workplace safety. The mods and percentages, less than 100 is good. The employer is better than average. Over 100, not so good. The employer has worse than average loss history. It is premium neutral on a statewide basis. We target an average mod over all the employers in the state that are experience rated of around 100. It comes in a little bit less, but pretty close to premium neutral. And then lastly, experience rating is only one component of what goes into an employer's premium. Their loss experience, risk characteristics, individual insurer rating plans, many other factors also go into it. But experience rating is one, again, to apply a direct financial incentive for workplace safety. So what's our role in this? What's the WCIRB's role? Well, we are the licensed rating organization of the commissioner and the commissioner's designated statistical agent. With respect to experience rating, we're really involved in all aspects of it. We propose changes to the plan structure and to the plan values that go to the insurance commissioner, who ultimately will review them and may or may not adopt them. We collect all the data that goes into an XMOD calculation in accordance with the Commissioner's regulations in the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan. We validate the data, and then we use that data and the Commissioner's rules and the Experience Rating Plan to then issue mods and administer the Experience Rating System. So really all aspects of Experience Rating, from proposing the values to the Insurance Commissioner and the structure that goes into the formula, collecting the data, and then applying the formula and administering the mods. Well, let's move into the 2019 changes. As a reminder, we talked quite a bit about these last year when they were in process of going into effect. That there were really two types of changes. The first is to try to address the first aid issue, the concerns that not all claims are being reported by not counting the first $250 of every loss in the formula. Secondly, we took the opportunity to get rid of some of the actuarial stuff that we really didn't need, wasn't adding a lot of value, to simplify the formula, and that causes us to also change the Experience Rating form, and Rob will talk about those changes a little bit later. Before we get more into the impacts of the 2019 changes, just a little bit of an ad on what to expect for the rest of the year in our Mod Talk webinars. In a couple of months, in July, we'll have a webinar on how to read a rate sheet, really go into the details of all the pieces in the rate sheet and what does that mean in a particular employer's XMOD. And the next month in August, we're going to go into something about all the ways you can get XMOD information. There's a variety of channels from the WCIRB that will allow you to get the XMOD itself, as well as information underlying it. And lastly, in October, we're going to focus on the factors that cause an XMOD to change from year to year. So feel free to register, and our webinar page has all the information on these, and so we'd love you to join us for the rest of the year. So let me go back to kind of the why on the 2019 XMOD formula. So it really goes back to 2015, about 4 years ago, where we brought together a broad group of stakeholders, including representatives of injured workers, employers, agents and brokers, insurers, medical providers, regulators, and really kind of looked at this issue. There were really some concerns around the non-reporting of small first aid claims. And what the group found was, yeah, this is a big issue. It affects injured workers' access to benefits, by keeping their claims outside the workers' comp system. They may not be getting all the benefits they're entitled to. There's a fairness issue of one insurer offering these plans and the others not. And from an employer who does report all their claims being disadvantaged against those that may not. And then also there's a issue about the ability to manage claim. We heard lots of anecdotes about a claim that was initially considered first aid and not reported to the insurer that later blows up and becomes much more significant. So what the group said was, well, make the reporting requirements as clear as you can, and then secondly, see if we could remove the disincentive to report these small claims. So in 2017, the WCR proposed and the Commissioner adopted changes to the claim reporting requirements in the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan, basically to clarify that any claim that has medical treatment costs must be reported, even if the employer pays the claim. So to try to clarify, anything with medical treatment costs does get reported to the WCIRB. That was 2017. And then in 2019, we modified the formula, actually did it a couple years back. The Commissioner adopted it to modify the formula to not count the first $250 of every claim, with the goal of getting all the workers' comp claims into the system. At that same time, we also took the opportunity to simplify the formula. So we get a lot of questions of why we pick 250. Well, a couple reasons. First, that claims that typically meet the California definition of first aid in the labor code, which allows a visit and a follow-up and maybe a drug or prescription or two, typically under the California fee schedule will be less than 250. So more true first aid claims will probably be below 250. And then secondly, when we looked at higher alternative thresholds like 500 or 1,000, basically it had too significant of an impact. I mean, the cure in a lot of ways was worse than the disease. So felt like 250 was our sweet spot. We will adjust that occasionally, look at inflation if we need to bump it up for inflation. So how does it work? How does the 250 loss exclusion? It applies to all claims, and it reduces each claim's primary loss by 250. Remember, under the California formula since 2017, the only thing that goes into the rating formula are the primary losses. There's anything above the primary threshold for an employer is not used in any way. So it's taking that 250 into what's going into the formula. It does change the rate sheet. Rod's going to talk about that. And now, because each claim is limited by 250, we're showing every claim individually, where in the past we'd lump together many of those that were under $2,000. I'll go to the examples, probably an easier way to kind of highlight how this works. So this is an example with an employer with a primary threshold of $10,000. Remember, the primary threshold is a key. It varies depending on the employer's size. For the very small experience-rated employers, it could be as low as $5,000 or so. For the very, very large experience-rated employers, it could be as high as close to $70,000. So it varies depending on an employer's size. In this example, I'm assuming it's $10,000. Well, for a loss less than 250, like 200, nothing goes into the rating. For the experience rating formula, it's as if that loss didn't occur. For something below the threshold, like 5,000, it's reduced by $250, goes in at 4,750. For a loss at the threshold of 10,000, it'll go in at 9,750. And in fact, anything above $10,000, $50,000, $1 million claim, it's all going to be counted and experience rated for this employer at their threshold of $10,000 less $250. This is the old formula, the 2018 formula in California. Again, messy, lots of actuarial terms, pretty ugly. We took the opportunity to eliminate all those credibility terms and really simplify it to 3 terms, almost understandable. And I think what's really important about this is that of the 3 terms, 2 of them, the expected losses in the denominator and the expected excess losses, the second term in the numerator, are really benchmarks. They're based only on employer size and the classifications that are assigned to their operations. So those are their benchmarks. The only thing that really the employer controls is their losses up to the primary. So it's a very direct measure of what's getting into the MOC, into an employer's mod. It's basically the cost of any claims that occur during their experience period up to their primary threshold, well, less 250. So it shows a much more direct impact on, we think, the incentive for safety. The other benefit we think of this formula is it really puts the focus where in the past there was a lot of debate over reserves and what goes into it. Well, for reserve differences above the threshold, they don't matter anymore for experience rating. So if an employer has a $10,000 threshold, whether a claim's reserved at $20,000, $30,000, or $40,000 doesn't matter. It's still going in at primary threshold, 10,000 less the 250. So a lot of the debates over difference in reserving have really become irrelevant as well. So, we think this formula, besides being simple, has some other significant advantages. So what's the impact from the simplification? The simplification has no impact. That's just essentially algebra. So there's in terms of the 250, on an overall system, we're still expecting an average mod about where it comes in year to year. We're not expecting any significant impact. For the most part, it's pretty modest of eliminating the first 250. About 85% of the mods will be 2 points or less. So the impact on most policyholders of this change is going to be smaller, much smaller than, say, the 2017 change, where we went to a variable split formula. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Rod to kind of go over the changes in the experience rating worksheet.
Thank you, and good morning. So for the purposes of talking about this, this will be kind of used as our guinea pig example of kind of the experience rating form as it existed in 2018. So as you can see, and Dave talked a little bit about it, any claim that is $2,000 or less, we would aggregate those together. Under the column next to it, where it has injury type and number of claims, you can see that for the under 2001, there were 2 claims under that, and there was only 1 claim that was over $2,000, and we listed the values that were associated with that. So in 2019, we're going to list those 2 claims that were previously grouped individually. We want to remove the $250 from the actual primary loss for all of these claims, and then actual excess losses are no longer used in the calculation, so we will remove that column and save a little bit of real estate. So when we get to the new 2019 formula, you can see that we still have the 3 claims. What we've done is we've ungrouped the first 2 claims, the one for $1,590 and $219. So now they're both listed individually. You can see now that we have listed them individually how this impacts the reduction of the $250. So the fact that there were 2 claims, if we didn't tell you exactly what the actual loss values of those claims, you would presume that we would have been reducing the overall claim values by $500, and that's not the case. So one of the claims was $219, so that one goes down to 0. There were no claim value used in the actual primary losses. Where the other claim of $1,590, we removed $250 from that. And then the claim that had $28,000 in losses with a primary threshold of $6,000, we've taken that $6,000 and removed $250 to use $5,750 as the actual primary losses. And then you can see, well, you can't see, but over on the right-hand side, there is now an empty space where there used to be another column. So here's kind of a side-by-side comparison. On the left-hand side is the 2018 formula, where again, we've grouped the claims, we've included all of the claim values, we still have the actual excess loss value column. And then in 2019, showing the new formula where all the claims have been listed individually, we're removing the $250, and we've lost the column.
But here,
the other thing that you'll see is the simplified formula. So the formula, again, that used to string on for the entire bottom of the page has now been just limited to the 3 values and the calculation.
Before I summarize sort of what we're seeing in terms of 2019 mods, we did get a question from the earlier section, and it talked about did we offset the expected loss values or the expected loss rate to reflect the fact that we're not counting the first $250. And in fact, we did. This was intended to be balanced. So the fact that we're not counting the actual losses each actual loss is being reduced by up to $250, we made a corresponding adjustment to the expected loss rates. So that means that an employer who was loss-free, since their actual losses can't be any better, they're 0 during the experience period, their mods, all else being equal, go up a little bit because now their benchmark is also gone down by the fact that the expected losses don't contemplate the first $250 of every loss. Again, the idea that there should be a premium neutral change so that by reducing the actual losses, every actual loss by up to $250 that goes into the formula, we also want to make a commensurate adjustment to the benchmark. So very good question. So what are we seeing in terms of the 2019 changes? Well, we started issuing 2019 X mods back in October following the insurance commissioner's decision. As of the beginning of the month, we've issued approximately 90,000 of them, which is about 3/4 of what we ultimately issue. We typically issue about 120,000 mods each year. And the average mod's coming in about where we expect. The average mod's around 94 for the first 90,000 that we've issued. Last year, it was around 95. The average over the last couple of years is right around that. So, no surprises. The X mods are coming in about where we expect, and we are showing some indications that this is working. We're seeing some indications, and I'll share those in a minute or two, about the number of medical-only claims coming into the system increasing. This shows our distribution of the 2019 X mods, the 90,000 or so we've issued, and again, about what you expected, somewhat bell-shaped on the left at least, and with at the high end, kind of some skewness, and about a little less than 8% of mods over 150. Again, kind of what we expect. So really no surprises. This next chart tries to show indexes the number of claims by moving 12-month periods ending as of September 30, index back to the 12 months ending September 30, 2010. And what you could see until recently, while the number of indemnity claims were growing pretty steadily year by year, 3 to 4% or so, the number of medical-only claims that in fact dropped and have been pretty flat, but we are seeing a spike in 27 and 2018 that tie to the timing of these changes around first aid, where they've grown, pretty significantly over the last couple of years at a much quicker rate than the rate of indemnity claims have grown, which, again, not necessarily conclusive, but some indication that, that these changes that were going into effect first with the clarification of the rules in 2017 of what needs to be reported, and then secondly, with the 2019 formula changes are, getting more claims into more medical only and otherwise may have been considered first aid claims into the system, which was the objective of those changes. So with that, Rod's going to talk a little bit about one of the tools we have to help estimate the impact of these 2019 changes.
Okay, before I get into the XMOD estimator, we did have one question about reporting claims, and so the question really related to, so what if we closed the claim, there were no values associated with the claim, do we still need to report that on a unit statistical report? And the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan directs that if there were no costs associated with that, so you had, and that's, again, you don't have any reserves, it's been closed, you didn't pay anything, as well as you had no allocated loss adjustment expense associated with that you wouldn't have to report it. We're not going to stop you from reporting it if there was no values in there, but as long as there was no, again, legal expenses, allocated loss expenses, and the other in medical and indemnity amounts were zero, you would not need to report those. Okay, so let's go on to the XMOD estimator. So the XMOD estimator is a tool that we use to help people to understand the potential impact that the change in the 2019 formula is having on experience modification. As Dave indicated, we're going to talk a little bit more about why mods change later on in the year, but we wanted, this estimator really helps and can be used as a tool to talk about the impact that claims have and changes in the claims can have on an experience modification, but also when we have formula changes, it can be used to explain to the employer exactly how much the formula change impacted the experience mod calculation. We did this back in 2017 when we went from the to the variable split point from a $7,000 specific split, and so employers could understand that change. So the way that you start, this is from our website, so this is available to the general public. You don't go to WCIRB.com, go to the estimator. You have, when you first launch it, it's going to give you this agreement where you have to agree that basically you're using this tool for its intended purposes. Once you agree, then it's going to launch and you're going to see the entries sections for the payrolls and the losses. On the left-hand side, you're going to see the section for the payroll and expected losses. So the first part is notes. You can enter the years that you're entering the payroll information, anything that's going to help you. This is free form. You don't have to enter anything if you want to. You can aggregate the payroll for all of the 3 years into one entry. When you enter the class code, the system will validate the validity of that class code. So over on the far right-hand side, you'll see class code validation. If you see an N in there, that's going to be bad. That ultimately means you're not going to be able to calculate the mod because there's going to be no expected losses associated with that to do the calculation. So then you enter the payroll amount. After you have entered the payroll, then you're going to start entering claims information. So again, in claims, you're going to have notes section where you can put in the claim number, or again, anything that you want to help you to keep track of where you're at in entering this. The number of claims is going to default to 1. If you recall, or if you use the past estimators in 2017 or 2018, you had the ability to aggregate claims so that you could put more than 1 in there. But for 2019, it has to be 1 claim. Then you enter the individual claim value, and it's going to default to non-exception claims. You do have the ability to change that to exception claims. So the question always is, so what's considered an exception claim? These are claims that have different handling than your standard claims. So things like death claims, where we are going to use the statutory, or we're going to use the standard death claim value to be used in the calculation as opposed to what was reported. And then you have compromised death claims, subrogated claims, joint coverage claims, and partially fraudulent claims, where we only use a percentage of the value of those claims in the actual calculation of the experience modification. So when you have these claims that require exceptional handling, this estimator allows and provides for the inclusion of that data so that you're going to get an accurate estimate. Once you would select the type of exception, so in this case we said, well, let's pick subrogation, then you're going to have to enter the ratio of the net claim, the claim that ultimately this insurer is responsible for, as compared to the gross, which would have been the total claim had you not gotten any recovery from a third party. You're going to have to enter that percentage of the net to gross. And you want that percentage to be as precise as you can. The farther down the numbers go in the calculation, the more precise your estimate is going to be. So if you just rounded this to say, well, it's close to 12%, you're going to get a different number than if you actually get down to the real root value of what it is. So again, I encourage you to put in as much depth in that estimator as you can once you determine what that ratio is, because that's what's going to determine how much of this claim is going to be used in the primary threshold. After you've entered all of the payroll and claims information in, then you click the button right in the middle that says Calculate Mod, and you are going to get the 2019 calculation of the mod based upon the payroll and loss data that you've entered. So up at the top, you're going to have what your primary threshold is. You're going to have the experience modification that was calculated based upon these payroll and loss values. In the actual losses, you will see that in the actual primary losses, you're removing the $250 from the various calculations. And again, all of the values, the expected loss rate values, are already included and embedded within this worksheet, and the D ratios commensurate with the primary threshold are also in there. So again, this automatically populates to calculate your mod. Again, the purpose of this tool is, one, to give you ability to kind of see and potentially manage claims. So what happens if this claim closes, or if we get a subrogated recovery, what would be the impact on our mod? But secondarily, and maybe as important, is to figure out, so what's the difference? The 2019 change in the formula with removing 250 had on the impact of this mod. So at the bottom, there's a bottom tab that you can select, and if you click that, it will tell you what the mod would have been had we not excluded the first 250, had we included that. And in this Excel spreadsheet, for those calculation of the mods that include the first 250, we've also adjusted the expected loss rates as well as the D ratios to be reflective of different values that would have been used had we not gotten approval to remove the $250 from the experience mod. So again, this is an excellent tool to help you explain to the policyholder whether this a change in formula had any significant impact in their experience modification.
So before we get to, we have a series of some great questions. Just a reminder, we do have an online educational program, Comp Essentials, that we think is really great. Really reflects a lot of details about experience rating. That's our second module, the fundamentals of experience rating, that go into really all aspects. What data is used, what's the experience period, how do you deal with special types of claims like subrogation. All of that is really kind of dealt with in a fairly easy to learn format. We also have one in classification basics and one on ownership, and we're within the next few months hopefully releasing our fourth around the fundamentals of the system, all about the workers' comp ecosystem from the injured worker perspective, from the employer perspective in particular. So each of these modules is eligible for 15 continuing education credits. There's information on our website to purchase them in bulk. They're fairly, we think very cost efficient. And so, again, I really encourage you all, if you haven't, to take a look at those Comp Essentials from information on our website. So with that, let's, turn to some of the questions and answers we had. We had one question on how do you determine the primary threshold, and that is a great question. The primary threshold is very critical for the experience rating, as we talked about this morning, and that depends on the size of the employer as measured by their expected loss rate. So it's essentially a function of their payroll during the 3-year experience period times their expected loss rates for their industry. So higher hazard industries have higher expected loss rates than lower. That determines their primary threshold. So that primary threshold could change from year to year. If the employer becomes smaller or bigger, their experience payroll either increases significantly or drops, or the expected loss rates for their industries classifications change. So that will change, can change from year to year. We propose the primary thresholds are part of the experience rating plan that the commissioner adopts. We also had a question regarding the median X-mod. We talked about an average X-mod at 94. The median tends to be a little bit lower than that because there are many smaller employers that are claim-free and are having credit mods. The median X-mod tends to be something in the lower to mid-80s typically. Rod, we also had a question about what happens when a case is dismissed at the WCIRB level for experience rating purposes.
So within the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan, we have several definitions as what constitutes a non-compensable claim. So in the instance where an injured individual has filed a claim, the insurer has gone through their investigation and they determined that that injury did not happen in the course of employment or didn't happen as part of the work-related activities that were to be undertaken by that individual. The expectation is they would deny that claim. The person then has the right to appeal to the Workers' Compensation Appeals Board. The Appeals Board would hear the merits of the case, and if they ultimately determine that no, this injury did not occur in the course of employment, it would be reported to our organization as a non-compensable claim. And once claims are reported as non-compensable claims, the value of those claims, even if there are costs associated with that, so even though there may have been some medical treatment that was provided or the insurance company may be obligated to pay some of the legal expenses associated with that claim, those claim values would not be used in the determination of the experience modification. So the values would still be reported to us. It's just for experience rating purposes, we would remove that from the calculation.
Rod, we also had another question about when entering the X-mod estimator, is our loss expenses, loss adjustment expenses also included as what's entered as part of the claim value?
So the answer to that is no. So the idea is that, again, you have to kind of follow the rules as it relates to reporting medical and indemnity amounts as contained within the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan. So for the most part, your expenses and things like that would not be included in the calculation. What we are, of course, looking for are incurred values. So this is also going to include any reserves that may have been set up that are going to be cover future expenses. So it's not just about what's been paid. It's also going to be about what we're projecting to be reliable for in the future based upon our best guess.
We also received a question about sort of the consequences for an employer who, may not report medical only claims or first aid claims. And while the WCIRB doesn't have any penalty that gets imposed on employers, I will say that the standard workers' comp policy contract requires the employer to report all claims to the insurer. So, typically that's something that is covered in the policy contract. We also had a question as to, is there a table of expected losses by class? And there is, in fact, as part of the experience rating plan, every year the WCIRB proposes and the commissioner ultimately adopts an expected loss rate, which is a loss rate for every per $100 of payroll for every classification, all approximately 500 classifications approved for use in California that apply to that year mod. So there's a table of expected loss rates that apply to 2019 mods, which reflect the experience period that goes into the 2019 mod. So it would reflect, 2017, 2016, 2015 policy year experience. And then that's updated the next year. There's an actuarial process, not dissimilar to the process that goes into developing the advisory pure premium rate for each classification, that for each year estimates what the average losses per $100 of payroll that go into the experience modification calculation within that, for that year's X mods.
I see a question about, so if a claim is closed or is lowered within a couple months of the promulgation of the experience modification, is that taken into account and will the mod be revised? So this kind of goes back to the provisions of the Uniform Statistical Reporting Plan that talks about valuation of claims and reporting that claims data to the Workers' Compensation Rating Bureau. So the expectation is that on an annual basis, insurers are going to kind of take a snapshot of their claims file and report the various values that they have as it relates to what's been paid, what's been estimated as it relates to reserves for potential future liability for the claims at a particular point in time. And then that data is going to be reported to our organization as part of their unit statistical report. If the claim changes, it either increases, decreases, ends up and becomes closed sometime after that initial valuation, those new values will not be reported to us until the subsequent annual valuation that's going to happen at the next year. So generally speaking, if claims are changing in value or they're closing in between valuation periods, those new values would not be utilized to calculate or recalculate the existing experience modification. Those new values would be used in the future. Now, there are instances, again, where there was a mistake that was made. Again, we pulled the wrong values. Our system wasn't updated. It should have been closed at the last evaluation. It wasn't closed or the values weren't updated. Again, when insurers recognize instances where they've made clerical errors in their submission, the plan does provide for them to submit corrections to those. And again, that information would be used then to recalculate or reevaluate the mod with the new appropriate values.
Thanks, Rod. And I see another question regarding the anticipated rate impact in comparison to the old rating. So the 2019 changes were essentially premium neutral. As we talked about, we make an adjustment to the expected loss rates that are commensurate with the fact that the actual losses going into the formula are, will be reduced by up to $250 per claim. So there was no estimated impact. The average mod's about the same as it was the year before, so we're not seeing kind of any overall impact on pure premium due to the change in formula. We also received a question regarding cumulative injury claims. We are seeing cumulative injury claims continuing to increase, though they may be leveling off. Cumulative injury claims are treated the same as any other claim in experience rating. There's no special treatment for cumulative injury or cumulative trauma claims. I will say that many of them tend to be reported late. So there are times when the first time a cumulative injury claim shows up in the mod is the second time that policy year is used in a mod calculation. But again, there's no special treatment. I would say the only thing that's kind of unique about them is that sometimes they're reported late and may show up for the first time in the second year or the third year that year is used in experience rating. We had a couple questions related to penalties for first aid type claims. And I will say there's no penalty on employers. The policy, as I mentioned earlier, the policy contract requires it. Insurers are required by the commissioner's regulations to report any claim that they're aware of that had payments, medical treatment incurred. So to the extent those weren't being reported, there could be, implications on the insurer if they were aware of claims and weren't reporting them, but there's no penalty per se. I think we hopefully got through all the questions. There were some great questions. Again, if we didn't answer it adequately, feel free to email it to us at communications@wcirb.com. And with that, thank you for joining us, and hopefully you'll join us for the later mod talks we have scheduled for the year, with the next one, I think, in July. So again, thanks everybody for participating.